This is a story of Aristotle, a Greek myth, is adapted and retold. It happened a long, long time ago, or maybe not so long ago, on a day such as this. Aristotle was a Greek builder. Excellent, fabulous, the highest of craftsmanship and skill that was known throughout the land. A contract came through. Oh, Eric Seichten loved food. And this one was a giant banquet hall. It would be the finest in his region. He gathered the men together and he says, oh, he remembered. Oh, the contract, the time. It was going to come to the time of his family's celebrations. The project may go into it. The time with his family was more important than anything else. And so he gathered his men together and he said, you know what? I'll make you a deal. If we get done ahead of schedule, I'll give you the biggest and the best bonus you've ever had working for anybody else. And even those who have worked for me, I will add that to the end of this contract, to your paycheck. The men were ecstatic, for they had so many other things that they wanted to do and had plans for that extra money. And so they went into the forest and they went fast and they axed down the trees, and tree after tree after tree fell. Ha ha, Aristotle smiled ahead of schedule. The work continued on through the weeks and into the months, until the men came to a place, a grove. And in the midst of this grove, a giant oak tree. This oak tree was so large and so magnificent. It was like it was an entire forest in one tree. And Aristocle's men, his eyes grew wide. Their axes dropped. They stepped back. What? Eric Satan's voice permeated their ears. What are you doing? This could get us done. We could be done by the weekend. This is a whole forest in one tree. The men said not a word. And they took another step back. What? Are you crazy? Did you forget about your bonus? Let's go. We have work to do. We have contracts to fill. One man, gathering the courage of his voice, spoke out, but what? But this must be. Don't you remember the stories? The stories that our grandparents, our parents have told us. Stories. Those are just things to bribe kids at bedtime and to get them to do what parents want. What are you talking about? He says the stories of a grove with a giant oak tree, that it's Demeter's grove. Goddess of plenty, goddess of nature. Those are stories, like I said, to bribe young, innocent, naive minds. You're on the clock. This is your job. Get to work now. The men backed away even more. They shook their heads, said no. Fine. Scared? Go ahead. Run away scared, but I will take care of this job, and all the money will be mine. And he picked up his axe, he lifted it high above his head, and he swung, and the blade pierced the tree. The tree cried out, and blood ran down its bark and coated the ground. The men gasped. Arsighton raised his axe, and with another swing, swung, and blade pierced the tree. The tree cried out, and blood dripped down along the crevices of the bark and soiled the ground. Arsighton, not listening, not caring, continued, and he swung his axe hard. And with every swing, the tree yelped, cried out, and blood oozed from the blade down along the bark and into the ground. Arsighton continued on through the night. And at last, in early morning hours, the final cuts were ready to be made. And in that moment, the tree spoke. This is indeed Demeter's sacred grove, and I am her favorite tree. If you continue, your fate will be worse than my death. Arsighton raised his axe. He swung harder than he had done before. And with a single swipe, the tree fell. And all the trees in the grove fell with her. True to his word, they had completed the task. The contract had a schedule. Arsighton was ecstatic. It was the most gorgeous banquet hall that was ever made. But in the days that followed, Demeter, a smile on her face and a song in her heart, went to her most favorite grove. But when she got there, she looked. Anger came from inside of her. She raged. How could this be? Tears filled her eyes. This was her tree, her sacred tree. This was her grove. This was her spot. Somebody had decimated it. Wiping the tears away, she looked around. Whoever has done this, they will wish their fate will be worse than anything, any crime they've ever committed. And with that, she boarded her bright red chariot, led by a team of horses. And she went off to the ice-capped land of Scythia, where in the barrenness of the land, there lived three creatures: anger, shame, and famine. But it was famine that she sought after. In the distance, a gnarled old woman, her hair thin as straw, hunched over, long nails, broken and rigid, her nimble fingers bulging at the joints, dug into the sand for just a morsel to eat. Famine looked. Her eyes went down. She knew the chariot, and it was destined that their eyes and Demeter's eyes would never meet. For prosperity and famine cannot exist in the same place. She trembled. The goddess too, looking away, uttered her command. Famine agreed. And providing a chariot, Famine bordered a chariot hanging on to the sides. It took her off to the place where Aristocton lived. And in the dark of night, she entered his bedchamber. And while he was asleep, she breathed her breath into his until every bone, every capillary, every vein in his body was filled with famine. She turned and she returned to the ice-capped land and barrenness of Scythia. And the next morning he awoke. He was so hungry. Oh my goodness, he ordered breakfast. And after that, he ordered breakfast. And every time he ate, it was like the more he ate, the hungrier he got. He ordered lunch, he ordered supper, and he ate and he ate and he ate. But he was never full. Well, it wasn't too long before he lost all his money because buying all that food was expensive. And then it came down to, he saw his daughter. His stomach growled. I mean, he was hungry. A person has to eat. And so he said to his daughter, he said, can you do me a favor? And he sold her for money, for food. But when she stood there on the auction block, rage filled her, but also the love for her father. After being sold, she escaped and she went to the water's edge. And there she prayed to Neptune. Neptune heard her prayer, saw the love and kindness in her heart, and turned her into a raven. And the person who bought her went around and said, and called out, have you seen this woman, this beautiful one? I just bought her on the auction block. But all he saw was a bird peering at him from the tree. And he returned, and Aristocton was so happy to see his daughter. They were reunited. And again, he sold her for the money for food. And again, she escaped as she prayed to Neptune, who turned her into a raven and a stallion and an old fisherman and so many others. But the day came when even Aristocton was so hungry, he couldn't take it anymore. And he began with his toes, and he ate up to his knees and on up through his chest into his arms and up to his nose. And that, my friend, is where this story ends. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much.